Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones. The unvisited ones. The cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. The July solo show coming out August 1st, as seems to be tradition about now. In fact, we are facing the distinct possibility of having 2 solo shows in a row, but we'll see what next week brings. Anyway, I guess the inspiration for this one was a suggestion Austin Coppock made following, I think, my most recent appearance on Aeon by Agnostic Radio, about why I think the future is brighter for novels specifically than people expect of books in general, and certainly novels. But novels as a subset of, I guess, the wider field of expression that I'm bullish on. Now, yes, this is a strange case to make, right? Everything we consume at the moment seems to be endless reboots or revisions, the latest being Veronica Mars, or just the fact that The Lion King, which held title as the most fascist animation ever until Frozen came along, is what people are going to the cinema to see again now and talking about on the socials. So it might seem strange when you look across quote-unquote culture, and it might seem strange to be mildly bullish, but the case is a good yet odd one. The good news is the malaise that we see in kind of like bigger cultural objects and their poor quality goes along with the end of empire. Martin Armstrong has done quite a bit of work on the decline in craftsmanship between the 1st and the 3rd century. He was one of the biggest coin collectors in the world at the time, and so you see it in currency, but also in general construction and so on. It's the canary in the creative coal mine. Empires get shit at the things that they used to be good at. And probably, and I think I delight this, it's sort of one of those, I delight in this rather, it's like watching the world burn kind of stuff. The even better news is that the same technocratic rules that all of these companies like Hollywood, Netflix and whatever run by will knock each other out of the race, and by running to the same rules and making it worse and worse, and thus attracting fewer and fewer people. Like Netflix actually posted a sub-decline recently, which it hadn't done before. So here's a short version of how that kind of thing plays out when people run to this, when companies run to the same operating system, right? Netflix only funds new shows that bring in new subscribers. So it doesn't continue to fund them after a season or 2 because the people that it was going to attract and convert, it did. And that money is better allocated to, it's essentially a Ponzi scheme, right? So that production budget goes to another program that may bring in a new sub. So you're never going to get something that runs for a long time on Netflix. And I find this gross, just you need to look at how you're living your lives as this is you. But gross though it is, most people are or were using Netflix to watch old 90s or noughties sitcoms like Friends and The Office anyway. And that's a sort of strategic risk that Netflix has to take because obviously these programs get pulled out of it, and the new programs bring in some subs, but they don't help them stick around because they don't fund it, right? On the Hollywood side of things, it's becoming quite clear, and it's been rumored for a while, but it's clear that Hollywood is juicing its reported numbers, which means even the sort of summer hits, the Marvel Comics universe, big, same as every other time films, are just no longer paying the bills. Certainly not for the money in, money out. And in both Hollywood and probably Netflix, now you've got Obamas and the like on the board. In Hollywood's case especially, it wouldn't surprise me if, like a lot of the big digital companies, it is intelligence money washing in through the back that keeps the lights on. And that's been there since the beginning in Hollywood's case, but it may be what is keeping the lights on. Now, that is a recipe for disaster in and of its own, but coming for them both is Amazon. The entire Hollywood industry, like if you took the production budget of Hollywood, it is essentially a rounding error on the money Amazon makes across its entire business. And they don't care about films or TV. They do care if you are a Prime member. You are valuable to them that way. So, if they can get the production process to scale, they can and may well eventually outspend all major global studios on content. And it's just there to get you into the Prime membership. It's kind of like Netflix, except that they have other ways to make money. So these things are all running on the same kind of idea. And at the end of it is nothing resembling content that you can be inspired by or look forward to. Some of them are accidentally good. I don't know if any of you, speaking of Amazon Prime, watched The Boys. Didn't hate it. But this Titan battle, what it essentially does is it makes everything worse until it gets so bad that you have an entire entertainment industry creating things that no one will watch. You have like a whole zombie industry, because particularly if the spook money's coming in through the back, it doesn't matter. You kind of see that with Netflix over the last few years remember how it used to have reviews and then it couldn't because people started reviewing very poorly the propagandized things that they were paying for, right? This is the trouble when you have to listen to the unwashed masses. And it'll be kind of like that. So the entire thing is synthetic. That is the way music has gone by and large. No one's really making money there, and everyone's just trying to say that these objects have like tentpole cultural relevance, like it's still the MTV era or something. And so while this might seem bad, and it is bad in some ways, what it does, and this is why I'm optimistic, it leaves open the entire battlefield of culture for the indie. And this is what I mean when I say that I saw novels potentially returning to cultural prominence. So it's a conversation, or it's a solo show about art and technology and with the kind of through line of the novel. So let's start with something like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and see if I can use that to demonstrate what I mean by the novel and how the novel could look and should be in this kind of, in this point in the timeline. Frankenstein it's an enfolded novel. It only exists because a volcano kept Mary and her friends indoors during 1816. You probably know the story, everyone does. They were at Lord Byron's summer house in Italy. And 1816 was the year without summer. And so they had to invent games to occupy themselves inside because it was cold and wet for the whole summer. So Frankenstein is at least in part a story told by rain and a volcano. And it's often mischaracterized as science versus nature in the Gothic sense, which was the tradition that Mary was drawing on. And it's definitely in there, but it's really only tangentially in there. What it's about, as far as I can tell, is exploration or learning unmoored to ethics, maybe, but individual morality, and because it's unmoored, it leads us astray. So it's a put it this way, Victor Frankenstein. If you don't know, this is surprising, but like he's the main character and the guy who builds the monster, right? He started off reading Agrippa before essentially being bullied into the cutting edge scientism of the 19th century, materialism and so on. Natural philosophy, which is sort of, Agrippa, right, is with obvious shortcomings, especially ones that the premium members will be aware of just from a dysfunctional worldview perspective, but nevertheless is better than like a dead machine materialism universe, right? But natural philosophy is also an epistemology. And what Mary Shelley explores is what happens when you kind of are based in a philosophy in which the universe is alive. So what natural philosophy has going for it is this centering of the sacred, whereas a scientific technocracy has a centering of the genius of, in particular, the European male mind, but the human mind in general. And so that, maybe if it wasn't articulated that way, is kind of the tension in Mary Shelley. And it's archetypal. And when you see it that way, when you see it as a natural philosophy versus, when you see it as centering a universe that's alive and has agency versus one that doesn't, a lot of films are reboots of Frankenstein. So Terminator and Jurassic Park are reboots of Frankenstein. It's the same message. It's archetypal because, and I think the book is archetypal because it's enfolded in our life world and in something we might call cosmic. People look at it, I remember studying it in high school. People look at it as an allegory of Lucifer's fall. It's got the whole Prometheus angle thing, but it's deeper than that. The Lucifer Prometheus-ish story and Frankenstein are expressions of the same enfolded or underlying pattern. It's not one stacked on top of the other. And that is fascinating because it's like the story fell or now moves through culture. And I think about that in the context of stuff Terence McKenna said about the universe appearing to run on narrative. And that's kind of what I mean when it comes to novels. And a good example of this would be the premium members are doing a tarot card course for Q3. And responding to stories, so the less atomized way of reading the cards by telling stories based on what you actually see in them, is a more medicinal approach to fortune telling because it feels older. It feels like hearing the Icarus of the jungle plants. Like it feels like when you are interfacing or thinking with story or narrative, it feels deeper or more authentic to what the universe even am. Now, in the newsletter last week, so in the All Red Line, I mentioned Cecil Rhodes and what Carol Quigley calls, roundtable groups or Anglo-Americans, which is a term I've been using for years now. And that 19th century Rhodes view is exactly what technocracy still is. It is global management by the racially superior. Rhodes made it explicit. He wanted to federate the English-speaking world, and then he wanted to bring the rest of the place, every habitable land, to directly quote him, under its management. So it is deliberately racial. Technocracy, defined in its own magazine in the 30s, is the science of social engineering. So it is applying managerial expertise to every aspect of life on this planet, and not just human life. And you see how this has colonized racist thinking. So it's either, going back to Rhodes, my white genes make me naturally better suited to the management of things, even things that you have been embedded in for millennia, or, from a technocracy perspective, the understanding of how to manage the whole universe that emerged in a white context is the best and only way to do things. And it's the same statement, right? It's just come out from either direction. And this is why, both centrist parties and unfortunately the loudest progressive and environmental voices and so on are captured by this technocratic thinking, by this imperial thinking without realizing it. And it's always why you get the calls for solutions that are bigger and more authoritarian in their management approach or and control of discourse or Amazonian rivers. So regardless of what the humans embedded in that context think, the answer is always more managerial authoritarianism. So how this relates to novels and why, as I'm painting, an ever grimmer picture, but this is the attitude that is underlying things like Netflix and business policy and media. But Catherine Fitz updated, and I like this, an understanding of technology as a definition to a rules-based system of complete micromanagement. And so it's technocracy is a rules-based system that replaces analog or coherent lifeways and markets and so on. And a rules-based system of micromanagement is exactly the smartphone app ecosystem that we all effectively moved to about a decade ago. I mean, how are you listening to this? How do you order food? How do you book transport? How do you find people to have sex with? How do you interact with geographically distant friends? And each of these platforms is literally rules-based, and these rules are designed to head towards its own understanding of optimization. And that's the unacknowledged tension behind, far-right pundits being kicked off YouTube or Tulsi Gabbard suing Google for bias, sidebar champ. These platforms are using rules to optimize your experience as they understand it. And so Catherine, again, regularly poses the question of whether you want to live in a human or inhuman civilization. So when you look at that, I want to bring it back to what I said, that it's biblical, right? It's a Tower of Babel. Like, this won't work. This is where my confidence comes from. You feel that the inhuman won't work to dominate a living universe because the universe is alive. It may reset it with lethal vengeance, but it doesn't win. And from a kind of like novel and cultural perspective and situating that in the world of apps, I want to come back to the whole leaving the center of culture wide open for indies, right? But Lima was a very interesting lesson for me in apps. I know that sounds strange, but the city is sort of like... it felt futuristic in a strange way. It felt like Blade Runner, but or cyberpunk that was exclusively apps, right? And I remember about a decade ago when I was still in telecoms media, we did a lot of research work around the countries and cultures that would skip the wired revolution. So they would skip laptops and desktop computers and tablets and obviously dial-up and all that. That was sort of long gone. And jump straight to the phone, right? And that's Lima. I've never seen anywhere that lives so completely in apps. Like, there's obviously Uber and Uber Eats, but there's also a South American one, Rappi. And I have never in my life seen so many branded delivery drivers. It was crazy. Netflix, of course, all that kind of stuff, all on the phone. And the first thing people ask when they meet you is they ask for your WhatsApp. And that is, again, funnily enough, I accuse any Australian friends I have who don't use WhatsApp of being racist, because it's like messenger apps, and in particular WhatsApp is like the app if you have non-English speaking acquaintances or friends. So it's used in Europe, and it's used in India and South America and so on. And I like, a thing white people like is accusing other white people of racism. You understand that. And I'm doing it for that reason. Anyway, I end up with it. I end up having them begrudgingly download WhatsApp, and then I get to talk to them. So, I win. Anyway, back to Lima. My experience was the same, obviously. So I'm communicating with friends and ordering food and transport and whatever while I'm there. But it was also, I think why it was a lesson, it was the first time I have had to rely on Google Translate in the field. For those who don't know, obviously you use it when you're on your computer or whatever, but you can now speak into it or have someone else speak into it and it will translate. You can take that around with you. And that was fascinating because it worked pretty well. And behaviorally, even if people hadn't seen what I was trying to do, if I'm trying to interact with someone in a bar or a shop or a driver or what have you, I just kind of wave the phone in their face and they'd kind of look at me and slowly talk into it, and then I'd see it on the screen or vice versa. People kind of got it. Now, I have mixed feelings about this. I had a really, really good time, and I am tremendously grateful for that kind of really clunky early version of Star Trek. But what tends to happen, and even in places, so I don't need to do that in France, even though I don't really speak French, but I did it for 5 years, right? After a couple of days in Italy, I kind of understand what people are saying. And even in Spain, when I would go to Spain, a couple of days in, and I'd essentially kind of muddle along. But Europe is different in this, like, if I'm in Spain and they don't speak English, they might speak French, or maybe we meet halfway in Italian, as a couple of friends of mine did in the jungle. I did not learn a fucking word of Spanish, because what happens if you kind of know another language is if you drop down, like, I kept trying to speak to them in French and it wouldn't work. And then I'd just draw a blank and I would use the phone, and I didn't get better, but I had clear communication with people. So this was a sort of teachable moment for how you should and shouldn't be in this archonic dystopia, maybe. And I think the metaphor I'm going with is becoming a hybrid rather than becoming cyborg. The cyborg term is a bunch of reasons. The cyborg term simultaneously is too bullish on the idea of enfolding technology into you as an organism, but it also doesn't allow for technology to be, in some instances, persons in the same way as hybrid does. And I think that's the difference between an animistic approach and a cyberpunk one, that we kind of like, it's a relational web rather than an assemblage. And this is, that might sound like that was for the premium members, I guess, because we're kind of deep in what even animism in this context, right? The hybrid approach allows for, I guess, the underlying medicinal patterns and options to be brought up and shared. And this is why I'm bullish about the return of the novel, and specifically indie novels. It in theory, and people have been saying this since the beginning of the internet, like it's good for creativity, for indie creators, and yes, and also no, obviously, for anyone who's in that field. There is something about the novel in the sort of dying days of Hollywood vitality rather than the dying days of the Hollywood industry, right? And it's that the novel has an infinite production budget. So when you're talking about, hey, like the great digital age, the promise of the 90s of being, say, a musician and or a videographer and having access to above home level or above domestic level, but still far below studio level equipment, there is not that kind of playing field with the novel. The novel can have an infinite budget, right? And so it's actually more than a match for Hollywood, as Hollywood's getting worse. So it's not even like we're matching them up. And why I think, and this kind of comes back to what I was implying chatting to Miguel, the premium experience in the 21st century is now being away from screens, not being in front of a large one. So culture, much as I dislike that word, it implies that human separation. You remember the episode with Zola Jesus? Much as I dislike that word, I guess a better word for culture in the purposes of this discussion is, I guess I prefer to think of human minds and language as habitat for ideas that are also persons, right? And I kind of think, these idea people are symbiotic, and they sort of swim up into our conscious awareness, again, for medicinal purposes for us. I think there is something about, this is loosely based on working with entheogens, but there is something in it for them to be here, and there is definitely something in it for us, these kind of enriching stories from a medicinal basis. And that's why I feel good about novels in particular. Nothing stops. The technology came and went on novels, and in the 19th century, the sort of great age of the novel, and again into the 20th century to some extent, well, actually definitely in America, it was the business was logistical. So it was about finding the cheapest amount of paper and shipping it to stores, and there wasn't really anything else to do. That's what made them so popular. They're premium now. So we've gone through different phases of technological development, and whilst it's not necessarily logistical, it is experiential now to be with a story. It's a holiday to be with a story and away from screens. And also when that as a technological opportunity hits the fact that we just aren't getting our story medicine, that's where I feel good about novels in particular. So a hybrid technological approach includes their fashioning, so obviously typing it or whatever, and their rhizomatic distribution. So you can spend, and you'll find plenty of videos for this, like you can write a really terrible short book or like a 10 things to do with your rose bushes ebook over a weekend, get it up on Amazon and start charging 99 cents for your trash ebook, right? Like you can do that. I guess that's what I mean by fashioning. Of course, that's like the baseline. There are better ways of doing it. I think the rhizomatic distribution goes along with the hybrid, right? Because that's a crucial component. Thinking with the rhizome as the model, rather than saying, which you will get on videos about being any kind of independent creator, right? Have a platform. Platforms are definitionally technocratic. Jump over to Twitter and look at what's trending and see if any of that is interesting to you. Large platforms are optimized majority positions. You either are creating that rules-based replacement for real life, or you have succeeded in kind of tumbling through that rules-based, approach to get quite large to do it. So it's not, you will hear that at writing conferences or whatever, write your book, have a platform. Yeah, they're technocratic, and there is a better, less colonized way of thinking with it. And it's to use the rhizome as the metaphor, right? And that doesn't mean smaller scale. It doesn't mean just sharing it amongst your friends. If you know anything about mycelium on this planet, you're dealing with like the largest organisms, and they run for miles underneath, the great forests of the planet. So don't think rhizome means small. It means human contact. It means person to person. It means sharing it through things like messenger platforms, which don't necessarily scale. They're not designed to. But things can move quickly through them, right? And that's the sort of hybrid approach. And so I thought I would close by, it's not a novel, it's music, but I thought I would close by sharing some music with you. And that's from me in a person-to-person exchange. This isn't about using the podcast as a platform. I'll tell you for why. This kid already has 2.3 million Twitter followers. So he's doing okay. I'm sure he'd be very grateful if you listen to his music, but he doesn't need me, right? Anyway, if you haven't heard of him, his name's Rich Brian, and he's this Indonesian artist who grew up working in his parents' restaurant in Jakarta. He's 20, right? He joined Twitter at the age of 11. Holy shit. Got quite popular making Vines and YouTube videos in that kind of sense. And it was YouTube as a platform. That's where he taught himself English and rapping. And a few years ago, he had like a few popular, but essentially comic or satirical tracks. You remember when that was the sort of 2012 to 2016 era, Lonely Island, that kind of thing. So he had a few of them a couple of years ago, moved to LA. And up until a couple of days ago, I thought maybe he was just one of those weird things that the internet throws up. But what is essentially his first proper album, The Sailor, came out a couple of days ago. Whenever you listen to this, it came out like 29th, I think, of July. And it's good. He's 20, but it's good. This is a kid who learned all of those things on the platforms that are available, and his first ever track was him singing, rapping over an app that essentially provides beats for that stuff. And 2.3 million Twitter followers and albums and living in LA later. So here's this kid who is a hybrid of all those things I find both fascinating and promising about the future. The rise of the global south, obviously, making technocratic infrastructure one's own, or decolonizing it in a way, I suppose. Independent creative expression, obviously. All that kind of stuff. And so it's music, and I feel like it's going to be a me to you share in that sense. But put it this way, there is a novel being written in Addis Ababa right now that will be bigger and obviously better than like The Martian or 50 Shades of Grey or something like that. And we have the rhizomatic capacity to make that happen. Victor Frankenstein built the monster. We have a frankly very exciting opportunity to help the monster build more Rich Bryans. Until next time.
It's 100 degrees, why you feeling down, what's the problem? We just here to be free. feel like this often. Bumping to the radio with the air so cold as the moonlight glows. No, we don't give a fuck, we ain't gotta change a thing no more. Fuck it, we gon' do it cause we want to. Days pass by, now we playing by our own rules. Chase Tennessee with a kiss and there's some great view. Dancing in the parking lot, jamming to some old school. We the kings of the city, all the lights look pretty. We bad boys like Daddy, we in the club like Fetty. Ay, keep my feet up on the dash. Gee golly, we just having a blast. The future's so bright, we ain't looking at the past. And we just all in the moment, cause it's 100 degrees. Why you feeling down, what's the problem? We just here to be free, it don't feel like this often. Bumping to the radio with the air so cold as the moonlight glows. No, we don't give a fuck, we ain't gotta change a thing no more. Ay, yeah. Oh, she look so good when the sun's up, but I love all the shit we do when the sun's down. Play around, all you hear is bad sounds. Turning up the music when we get a little too loud. Turn around and smile, oh she got the pearly white. So she bout to suck me dry, I need me some Peter Light. We gon' take it slow, hit it while she on the phone. Said she want some more, keep it on the low, low. Ay, keep my feet up on the dash. Gee golly, we just having a blast. The future's so bright, we ain't looking at the past. And we just all in the moment, cause it's 100 degrees. Why you feeling down, what's the problem? We just here to be free, it don't feel like this